All right, everybody. Mehran here, coming to you live from LSATMax headquarters in Venice Beach for another Instagram live Q&A about everything LSAT. Today's topic is going to be LSAT prep and LSAT prep strategies, how to best approach preparing for the LSAT. So in terms of today's structure, we'll start off with my personal story, my journey from the 140s to a 174 in Harvard Law School. I'll talk exactly how I was able to show that improvement. And then I'll obviously jump into questions. So again, if you guys have questions, please make sure to drop them into the questions box so I can show them on the screen as I start to go through them. But obviously super excited to see you guys all joining again. I know you guys have been finding these super helpful, so we'll keep doing them for as long as needed. In terms of the previous sessions, please note that they now are available on YouTube. So if you go to our LSATMax YouTube page, which is just LSATMax, you can watch the previous week's pre-digital LSAT and post-digital LSAT Q&As. And then obviously today's will be live for 24 hours on our Instagram page, and then we will get it live on YouTube after that. One other thing before we get started, again, if you have any issues with your LSAT prep and you want a free consult, just text LSAT to this number, 310-818-7743, and we can schedule a free consult for you. So super excited to again have you guys here. So let's start with my personal journey. On my first practice LSAT, as most of you know, I scored a 148, and I was blindly guessing on the entire exam, and I'm sure I guessed right. So I think it's safe to say that the 148 was actually inflated. I had never seen formal logic. I was a business economics major in undergrad. I didn't read for my major, didn't read in my spare time. So I had a lot of work to do, to say the least. In terms of how I prepared, I enrolled in a $1,500, I want to say 10-week LSAT prep course. And on day one, I remember showing up to class, and my instructor was brand new. First time teaching. I think he had scored a 177, but never had any previous LSAT prep experience. And while I'm sure he was brilliant, as obviously his score demonstrated, nothing he conveyed to me that day made any sense. So actually my first step was to call the company and look for a more seasoned instructor in my area. Thankfully, there was one about a 45-minute commute away, so I started to make that commute and attended that class instead. And I think that was really important. And again, something we always emphasize for students who are considering LSAT prep, right? It's really about the person that is going to be your LSAT instructor. Because if you're thinking about a traditional in-class course, the variance of instructor quality, or the instructor quality varies drastically, right? So you really want to hone in on the person that they're putting in front of you to teach you how to score as high as possible on the LSAT. And so obviously by doing that and making that commute, I was able to have a more seasoned instructor who instilled the proper foundation in me in terms of strategies and techniques to apply on the exam. But even with that, by the time my course finished, I had gone from my 148 to, I had hit 160 I think once, but I was generally stuck in the high 150s. And so at that point I was faced with taking the LSAT that I had planned, or reconsidering and starting over, not starting over, but postponing my exam and continuing to prepare on my own until I was closer to my target score. And that was the decision I made. For me, it wasn't about going to law school, it was about going to one law school. And I knew that to have any chance of getting accepted to Harvard Law School, I needed to break 170. So I went to work getting my score as close to that as possible. And I think that second step of the process is really where the misconception comes from a lot of students. You look at traditional LSAT courses and they give you access for 8-10 weeks. Okay, that doesn't mean that you're going to hit your peak score within that period of time, right? So, for me, my entire journey took me about 7 months. And again, the course was the first step. The second step was taking what I had learned and really honing and implementing on practice LSATs under time pressure. Because again, obviously, anyone who's preparing for the LSAT knows it's one thing to get the questions right. It's another thing to get them right under the time pressure, right? So I think you really want to think about LSAT prep as that two-step bifurcation. What am I doing? And then, okay, how do I do what I'm supposed to do under the time pressure? And so that was my story. Obviously, something else to highlight. The first time I actually tried to take the exam, I had to cancel. I made a mistake on Logic Games that I caught, thankfully. Back in my day, again, they used to average LSAT scores. So if you made a mistake like that and you knew you weren't going to get your score, it was highly recommended to cancel, and that's what I did. Thankfully, today, that's not the case. They generally only look at your highest score, obviously something to check with the schools that you're interested in. But that process, I hope just again clarifies, nerves are normal. So it is natural to feel nerves when you go take the exam for the first time. Even myself, I experienced it. But obviously, the hope is that by continuing to do simulated exams as frequently as possible, you can put yourself in a position to really be comfortable with not only the exam experience, but also your ability to achieve your target score, right? And we'll talk about some of the questions here that we got. In terms of how do you know that you're ready? And I think obviously the easiest way to know that you're ready is, what is your target score, and are you able to consistently achieve that target score on your simulated practice exams? If you are, that gives you the sense that you're ready, right? So that's the way to think about it from that perspective. Some other questions that we got here that I'll jump into as you guys jump in and keep posting your questions, please. But one of the questions we got was, where's the best place to start LSAT prep? You're just thinking about law school. You finally turn your attention to the LSAT. Where do you start? And the best place to start is take a practice LSAT. LSAT offers a free practice LSAT. A number of them now. They actually offer 3 free digital practice LSATs. LSATMax app and the online version, obviously also a free practice LSAT as well. So if you actually download the app and just tap the free LSAT icon, right, you can actually take the June 2007 LSAT, get a detailed score report with analytics, and also watch explanations for every question. But I think that's a great place to start, because obviously we want to get a sense of where you are, not because it's going to tell us where you're going, but I think it does give you a sense of how long that journey will take you. So for example, my spread of 148 to 170 was quite the spread, right? We're talking about at least 22-point increase. And I think that gives you a sense that it will take me longer than it would take somebody who started in the 160s to get their score into the 170s, right? So I think that's really the benefit of starting your LSAT prep with a practice LSAT. And also, just in case you're a natural, right? Imagine you take the LSAT and you get exactly what you wanted to score without any prep. Fantastic. Obviously, that's a rare student. But if that's you, why bother wasting any time or money on LSAT prep materials? So that's the best place to start. And again, in terms of the ideal amount of prep time, I think you really want to focus your attention on your target score. And how do you come up with your target score? You want to focus in on your target school's 25-75 LSAT range. And I can use Harvard's as an example. Again, I don't know if this is still accurate, though. But recently it was 171 to a 174. It might have changed slightly. But recently it was 171 to 174. What does that mean? That means that 25% of admitted students score below a 171, 25% score within, 50% score within a 171 to a 174, 25% score above a 174, right? So for the schools that you're targeting, you definitely want to get your score within the 25-75 range. So for Harvard, if I could be within a 171 to 174, that's fantastic. Ideally, if I could get it above the 174 range, that would be even better. And I appreciate everyone coming in and waving hello. It's great to see you guys joining us. And so I think one of the things to, again, think about in terms of where you are and where you want to be, the larger that distance, generally speaking, the longer that will take, the more practice it will require, right? So that's a good kind of baseline place to start with your LSAT prep. And then after that, if you have created a free account with LSATMax, the first 5 lessons of our course are also unlocked, so you can get started and start to get a sense of the strategies and techniques that you want to start to apply. Because, again, that's really the value of an LSAT prep course, right? Teach you proven strategies that will show the results that you're hoping for if you spend the time to implement it correctly. And again, I think it's important to think about LSAT prep as a marathon, right? It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time. But again, anything worth doing in life is not easy, right? And obviously the ability of this exam to open remarkable doors for you, it is the #1 factor in law school admissions. So we highly recommend spending as much time as possible to maximize your LSAT score and make the most of the 3-year commitment that you're going to make by going to law school, and obviously not only the opportunity cost, but then the cost of actual law school tuition, which cannot be understated here. Let's dive into some questions here. Would you explain the difference between a good university? I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but something to think about in terms of, another question that we got that I think this one kind of ties into here is what's the point of preparing for the LSAT? Why bother? Everyone goes to law school. There's bar review courses. You're going to pass the bar exam and become an attorney. Interesting perspective to have. I think, the concern about doing the best on the LSAT isn't really about passing the bar exam. Again, I think, a lot of people make the bar exam to be this 800-pound gorilla, but really the LSAT is way more challenging than the bar exam. The bar exam is a subject-based exam, whereas the LSAT is testing a way of thinking. So it's really night and day. I don't think anybody, I get that, the pass rates that are out there in terms of the bar exam really give people pause, but I think that's more to do with the methodologies that, the leading companies are employing as opposed to the aptitude of the student. And I think, with BarMax, we've been able to show remarkable success with those students who have no business passing the bar exam according to conventional wisdom, but somehow they use BarMax and they pass first time. So, again, I think that has a lot to do with methodology. I think the concern with attending lower-ranked law schools is, again, what we've discussed on a number of occasions, is the idea of borrowing $200,000 to pay for that education. Is that going to be a good economic decision for you? And the idea there is, will the school that you're attending give you the job prospects to repay that debt burden? If it's not going to, then no, it's a terrible idea. You should not attend law school, because all you're going to do is saddle yourself with crippling debt burden, and whether you'll have job prospects to repay it, again, I think those tend to improve as you go up the law school rankings. Now, that doesn't mean that you cannot be a successful attorney from lower ranked law schools. Again, what we suggest is try to do as well as you can on the LSAT, so that if you do go to a lower ranked school, hopefully you're going with some merit-based scholarships, which will alleviate your debt burden upon graduation. And yeah, obviously the bar exam difficulty does depend on the state. California is traditionally thought of as the hardest bar exam in the country. But again, those testimonials and success stories that I'm talking about with those students who shouldn't be passing according to conventional wisdom, a lot of them use BarMax California. So we would still have that same general principle with even the California exam. Getting 20 plus consistently on logical reasoning and reading comp logic games are killing me. Best way to improve? Great question, John. So really the best way to improve on logic games, because the logic games, I think, is the easiest part of the LSAT to see how repetitive the exam actually is. It's harder to see it with logical reasoning and reading comp because of the English language and the imperfection of the English language. But with logic games, it's really easy to see, because you can see that firefighters working in a week or people in a parade are, this is the same concept. It's a linear kind of arrangement. So the best way to improve on logic games, again, assuming that you have a good foundation in terms of how to approach linear games, group games, right? Group games have a ton of sufficient and necessary concepts, right? So being super comfortable with either or, not both, how those concepts relate on in-out games versus, splitting them into group games, I think is really important. But assuming that you've gone through all those game types and the techniques and strategies you're going to be using, my advice would be get your hands on every logic game ever released. And we're going to start going through them. Give yourself 8 minutes and 45 seconds to do each game. Any game that you can't finish on time or get perfect, I want you to put in a pile. Any game that you do get perfect and finish on time, I want you to put in a separate pile. Obviously, we're going to review our work, because even if we got it right, we want to make sure that we got it right for the right reasons, didn't miss anything. But what I want you to do with the pile of those that you got wrong or couldn't finish under the time pressure is come back and do them again. And again, there's nothing wrong with remembering the game. The hope on the LSAT is that you encounter a game and you think to yourself, oh, this reminds me of birds in a forest, right? Because obviously if it reminds you of a game that you've seen before, I think the likelihood of you being able to set it up and do it correctly increases. And I can use a really simple example of what we're trying to do here with logic games. So on a linear game, that's 1-to-1, right? And 1-to-1 means each variable shows up one time, right? If I were to tell you A comes before B, right away I know B can't be first, A can't be last, right? Obviously that's a very simple example, but I want to highlight the point here. If you review a game that you do and you miss a deduction, right? You miss that deduction that B can't be first, A can't be last. What I want you to do is focus in on the rule or combination of rules that allowed that deduction to be made. The hope being that in the future, if you encounter that rule or combination of rules again, you'll be able to make the deduction, right? So that is something that I would suggest in terms of logic games. How long did it take before you really understood sufficient and necessary? Was there anything? So, again, I think there's two parts to sufficient and necessary. The first part is being able to identify the keyword indicators and extract the pure logic from the passage. And that's pure memorization, right? So that did not take me long, right? Memorizing what if introduces, unless, without, either or, not both, right? I think that is quick memorization, right? You just want to memorize the keyword indicators and the corresponding formulas. I think obviously then the more challenging part for students is when you encounter the questions that don't use keyword indicators, right? Or statements that don't use keyword indicators. For example, cats invariably have 4 legs. It's not a keyword indicator that we've introduced in our class, right? But that's a conditional statement, right? That's telling us something. If you're a cat, 4 legs, right? And so I think that part of sufficient and necessary takes a little bit longer, but it starts from your comfort with the keyword indicators and understanding that these are conditional statements, right? And it's another thing to keep in mind. It's not just about seeing the keyword indicator, right? You could see that keyword indicator in a statement that's not a conditional statement, right? So really make sure that, it's a conditional statement, and a way to test that is, can you rewrite it as if then? I think that's really a good trick to use on sufficient and necessary. Is 4 months enough to reach a 170? Well, again, so it depends on where you're starting, right? I think the farther you are from that target score, the longer it will take. But 4 months is a really solid amount of time to prepare. I think by the time I had got 4 months of prep in, I was in probably the mid 160s. I was stuck in the mid 160s, making careless mistakes on logical reasoning, but heading towards the 170. So again, I think every student is different. It's really about where you start, where you want to go, and also how much time you have to commit to your LSAT prep. So you like that transition? That was a really nice transition into that question. Also from Legally Brute. So 2 questions in a row here. Your lucky day. So how many days should you study how many hours a day should you study? All right. Well, I think, the thing for that is, we recommend trying to treat it as a part-time job. That obviously assumes that you have the time to treat it as a part-time job. If you're working full-time, right, that's not going to be possible. So assuming that you can treat it as a part-time job. If you don't, listen, all that means is that the journey is going to take you longer. Something that would have taken you 3 months if you had a part-time commitment is going to take you maybe 5 months without that level of commitment, right? So the idea is that you're just going to need to space it out over a longer period of time, right? And that's, again, why does LSATMax offer lifetime access? We offer lifetime access because we want you to think about LSAT prep as longer than an 8-10 week journey, right? And obviously we understand that life doesn't stop and start at your convenience, so it's really nice to have an on-demand LSAT prep course that you don't need to worry about losing access to. How much can you improve now until the September LSAT? Ooh. So what is today? Today is the 25th, 25th, right? So we're basically about 8 weeks out. I mean, 8 weeks is a long time. So you should be able to improve, a pretty decent amount. I mean, I think 10 points is a very reasonable expectation in that period of time. But again, I think it depends on, listen, I think 10 points when you're in the 130s is very different from 10 points when you're in the 160s, right? So it also becomes more difficult as you scale up because your margin of error is so much smaller. Like for me, that was really my main issue. I apologize. Apparently there's some kind of fly in this room. That was my main issue was, getting my logical reasoning to a point where I could, get to a maximum wrong of 10 questions, which is what I needed to score a 170. I hope that was helpful. But the thing is, listen, guys, make the most of your time. Another thing, so I think this is another thing to think about. A lot of people, they've registered for the September LSAT, or they're not sure if they should register for the September LSAT, right? How do I know what LSAT should I register for? Okay, so a couple things in terms of that question. I think the first thing when you think about that question is when do you want to apply to law school, right? So for people who are applying to law school this fall, right, it's go time, right? We got to get our applications in and complete, and obviously they won't be complete without an LSAT score. And so, September, October, November, these are great options for everyone applying for the fall, the class entering fall of 2020, right? So you apply this fall for the class starting next fall. And so that's really the way to start thinking about when you want to schedule your LSAT. Now, again, in terms of knowing when you're ready to take the LSAT, I think that comes back to, understanding the target score that you need to get into the schools that you're interested in. And then obviously taking simulated exams as you progress with your prep and seeing if you are achieving that score on your simulated exams. If you are, you're ready to take it. Now remember, you can always register for an exam. And then change your exam date. So for example, right now, you can register for the September LSAT. Again, the deadline for the September LSAT registration is the 1st of August, guys. So if you haven't registered for the September LSAT and you're thinking about taking that LSAT, make sure you register. I would do it today so you don't forget. I mean, obviously, we will send reminders out to anybody who has created a free account with us in our app or online. But here's your reminder. Go register for the September LSAT. Now, for those of you who are already registered and not sure if you're going to be ready, I think, keep in mind that you have until August 21st to change your exam date. So what I would suggest is, continue to prepare, watch your scores on your simulated exams. If you're not anywhere near where you're hoping to be by September, you might want to consider, paying the fee to change your exam date and taking it later. In terms of, is November, Alicia, I see your question there, is November cutting it close for fall of 2020? Again, I think it depends. It's definitely not as ideal as September or October or even July or June. Again, the idea there being rolling admissions. And I see, Ash, your question there too about the October LSAT. It's really the same question. Listen, I think between applying earlier and applying later, you should always pick the scenario that gives you the LSAT score that you're going to need to have a chance to gain admission. Right? No law school is going to say, hey, look at Mehran, he applied on September 1st with his 120, let's let him in, right? That's not the way it works. But yes, all things being equal, rolling admissions is a factor to consider. But again, I think what's more important is making sure that your LSAT score is where you want it to be. So again, similar question. So what you want to do here, Michael, is every school has different application deadline dates. Like for example, I want to say Harvard's is February 1st. And so February 1st, obviously any of these September, October, November exams are fine, right? But as you head into 2020, the March exam is not going to work for you, right? But other schools have later deadlines. So I think the key here is check with the schools that you're interested in, get a sense of their application deadlines, right? And then think about, is it too late? Now remember, even though we're in the digital LSAT world now, the score are not returned to you instantaneously. So there's still a period of wait time until you get your LSAT score. So definitely something to just keep in mind there. Although the digital LSAT is making that less of a turnaround time. So, should we continue to use the books? Great question. So listen, I still think it's really nice to be able to follow along with the lesson and take notes. It's a very active process as opposed to just sitting back and not really doing anything. And so definitely keep taking advantage of the lesson notes as you watch the lessons. But in terms of homework assignments and the practice exams, we highly recommend taking as many of them in the format that you're going to see on exam day, which is obviously the digital LSAT. So we would recommend doing as many questions as possible on the tablet as you can. Now, if you don't do questions on the tablet and you do them in the hard copy, just remember, please come back and at least input your answers to keep it taking advantage of our analytics that will track your progress and highlight your strengths and weaknesses as you progress, so then we can use that data to kind of customize our prep time. So again, another question about early admissions: do you have a higher probability of getting in? Again, so I think the idea is, since it's rolling admissions, if you apply on day one, when they look at your application, the class is wide open, right? They haven't made any offers of admission. They haven't had anybody accept offers of admission. Whereas as you progress through the cycle of the application or the law school application cycle, they're going to start making admissions offers, right? And obviously, as they make admissions offers, students will accept and the class will start to fill up and it becomes more competitive, right? And so that's the idea there. So yes, it is better to apply earlier if you can. What is the LSAT score that will get you a scholarship? Well, great question. I think, again, that is going to be related to the schools that you are considering, because a 160 will get you scholarships to schools that are looking for scores in the 150s, right? But obviously, if a school wants a 170, that's not going to do anything. So again, it's all relative, depending on the score that the schools you're interested in have. Or are expecting. How do you keep your spirits up when you miss 2 a.m.? So, great question. Listen, guys, I think this is a great question. As I can attest to firsthand, studying for the LSAT was a very difficult part of my life, because it's a very challenging exam, and especially when you have big dreams, and this one exam is effectively the only thing standing in front of you in those dreams. I think it's natural to feel pressure and then obviously feel frustration when you don't see the improvement that you're hoping for. But again, as I stress all the time, I hope my personal story really emphasizes to you that this is a learnable exam. I was not a natural, but I was able to improve dramatically. And you can take that a step further, because I always say that there's a point of no return when it comes to LSAT prep, where the exam clicks. How could I go from so low to where I was and then consistently achieve that score anytime I were to take it now, right? I hope that shows you that there's something there. There's some underlying pattern that, again, I think it comes back to why it's so important to have a nice approach to how you prepare, because by approaching the exam the right way, you will unlock it. Whereas I think what you see with a lot of students that builds this frustration is, a lot of our competitors, they don't teach it properly. And the reason they don't teach it properly is because they don't hire instructors who scored in the 99th percentile, right? And so they dumb it down and they give you these gimmicks that aren't going to help you. And then you're surprised at why you don't see improvement even though you're putting in the time. And I always say, listen, you could take practice LSATs until you go blue in the face, right? You're not going to see your score improve until you are able to address the foundational issues with your strategies and techniques. So again, if you are struggling, great transition to, again, reach out to us. 310-818-7743. Shoot us a text. Get you a free consult. Could even be with me. I mean, depends on how lucky you're feeling that day. All right. So, well, again, when you say don't trash your competitors, not cute. Again, I think, it's not trashing our competitors, right? They can go and hire 99th percentile LSAT instructors, right? And again, what we care about at TestMax is the student. And I think that putting somebody who is not qualified to teach you in front of you, to teach you something, particularly when you've spent thousands of dollars, right, is really unacceptable from so many different perspectives. So I think, again, I wish that wasn't the case. I wish every LSAT company out there only hired 99th percentile instructors who had experience, but sadly that's not the world we live in, right? But again, and I apologize if you took offense to that. I think it's important for students to know the reality of the LSAT prep space so that they can put themselves in a position to score as high as possible. Is it beneficial to still take practice sessions if you're struggling to grasp really concept? So again, I think it depends, right? If you look at our course calendar, we recommend, or we assign the first diagnostic exam after you get through, I want to say, strengthened questions. And the reason we wait for strengthened questions is, that's the most commonly tested question type on logical reasoning, so I think it would not make sense to have a practice exam before that. But obviously, even at Diag 1, when students in our course take Diag 1, there's a lot of concepts that they haven't encountered yet. So, I think, it's important to practice under time pressure. If you think about our course calendar is recommended over about 10 weeks. And over that period of time, we assign 6 diagnostic exams. So we don't require a ton of time practice as you go through the course. We really recommend saving that for the second step of the process, which is in our calendar, the practice and review section of the calendar. I think this is because the way we structure the course, right? The way LSATMax is laid out is every question type or concept has its own lesson, right? And obviously, the number of question types that you see on logical reasoning is vastly higher than what you see for games and reading comprehension. So that's why. Now, also that being said, don't forget that logical reasoning is half of the exam, right? 2 of the 4 scored sections are logical reasoning, so something to definitely focus on. And if you find yourself struggling with logical reasoning where you're making careless mistakes under the time pressure, but it's not, a question type or concept that's giving you trouble, that was really where I was when I got stuck in the 160s. I made a minor tweak to my approach where, I know there's a tendency of students to kind of rush through the stimulus because of the time pressure. You want to get to the question statement answer choices. But I think it's really counterproductive because, yes, true, by rushing through the stimulus, you'll get to the question statement answer choices faster. But you're not going to be in a position to answer the question, right? Which I think is what, don't forget what they're testing on logical reasoning. They're testing your ability to encounter a flawed argument and understand that. Whether that means weaken it, strengthen it, identify the flaw in abstract terms, find the same flaw. It's all based on the same idea of understanding the argument in the stimulus and thinking critically about it. So, my advice would be sometimes slowing down will actually speed you up. And if you Google struggling with logical reasoning, I have a video on YouTube that you can watch that I go over this epiphany that really made all the difference in the world for me. So definitely check that out if you're struggling with logical reasoning. What would you recommend as a strategy for those taking the September LSAT? Well, I would recommend spending time preparing, hopefully with a quality LSAT prep course. Another thing I would recommend is doing simulated digital LSATs, right? Because again, one of the things that students who took the July exam who didn't do simulated digital LSATs, they were in for a kind of a rude awakening on exam day, right? So you really want to get comfortable with the digital LSAT format. So do as many simulated exams as you can in that new digital format. And again, LSAC offers 3 free exams, 71, 73, and 74. But beyond that, you can download Practice LSATs by LSATMax. Again, free app to download in iOS and Google Play Store. Comes with a free LSAT, which is the June 2007 LSAT. And then every other LSAT is available to purchase a la carte, right? So you can take advantage of that without purchasing our course. But I think that's something to really spend time on. Okay, here's a specific question about LSATMax, what to do in the practice and review phase of the calendar. So one thing that, make sure that you guys are using email addresses that you check, because when our calendar shifts to that stage of the process, we actually send an email explaining exactly what to do there. So if you haven't received it, you can also just send a message to support. Just tap on the support icon from the left menu, open a chat with us and request it, so you have it in writing. But I'm happy to go over it here. That idea is one full-length exam a week, preferably at the time of your LSAT. So the September LSAT is Saturday morning. So Saturday mornings should be our full-length 5-section digital LSAT under time pressure. And then, the rest of the week, we recommend doing one of two things. One, if you identify any pain points in the practice LSAT, from the analytics and the score report, definitely review those concepts to make sure that we're clear on those and we're not having any consistent problems appear. But if you don't identify anything like that, what we recommend doing the rest of the week is individual sections under time pressure. The idea being, we understand you want to keep practicing under time pressure, but do not discount the mental fatigue that comes with the 5-section LSAT in a row, right? It's extremely mentally draining. And the last thing you want to do before your big day is burn yourself out mentally, right? And so, that's why we talk about, how many practice LSATs should you take. Again, it's not about just taking them as 5-section LSATs. You can take individual sections to continue to practice under time pressure. Obviously, I do think you want to get comfortable with the 5-section gauntlet, right? Because, that is something that is very different from doing individual sections. Let's get through as many of these as possible. It's rapid fire time. Full-time student, part-time worker taking give me a schedule for prep. So again, I think this is more of a personal thing. What I would suggest is text LSAT to 310-818-7743, and we can schedule a time and go over your specific situation in detail and come up with a plan. But if you're looking at our calendars, right, the way to think about any of our calendars, because all of the materials are available on demand, it's not about the day we assign something, right? You want to think about the calendar as an order of assignments, right? So start making progress through those assignments, right? Obviously, if you're working, you're going to have less time. It's going to take a little bit longer to get through it, but it's still the same approach. So, obviously, for this question, in terms of which section should we spend the most time preparing for, logical reasoning is half of the exam, right? So just from a weighted perspective, logical reasoning is where you should spend the majority of your time. Now, obviously, in addition to that, I think it is based a little bit on your personal strengths and weaknesses, right? For me, logic games was my best section. I didn't need to spend a lot of time on logic games, but the amount of time I had to spend on reading comp and logical reasoning was inordinate. So again, I think that's a personal. So we kind of answered this again. The best place to start is taking a practice LSAT. Again, we offer a free practice LSAT. LSAC offers 3 digital practice LSATs. Take a practice LSAT, get a sense of your current score, and start to think about what you want to score. And I think that's really the best place to start with LSAT prep. So I apologize if they keep cutting these off. I'm not sure how I can read the full question. So, I'm going to, Cameron, if you can figure out how we can read full questions that cut off like this, that would be great. Cameron, my amazing intern who actually came up with these IG Live ideas. So, round of applause for Cameron. But in terms of, fluctuating with logical reasoning, so a couple things. First, let's make sure it's not a question type or concept that's giving you trouble. If it is, right, obviously hone in on that specific question type or concept to make sure that you're comfortable with it. Maybe rewatch the video lesson, right? Go back through the homework and review those questions. In terms of if it's not a specific question type or concept, I think it comes back to what I was talking about with myself when I was reading the stimulus too fast, right? And again, I would go on YouTube and just type in struggling with logical reasoning, and you'll see a video. I didn't have the beard, so you might not recognize me, but it is me a few years back where I go over exactly what I did there with logical reasoning to eliminate that problem for myself. In terms of, do you have any tips for logical reasoning? I keep getting questions incorrect even with diagramming. So, difficult question to answer, right? Because I think, this seems to be a specific, sufficient, and necessary related question. And again, another, similar question that we got was about, should I expect to not have to diagram on an exam day? And again, I think it varies, right, based on the type of sufficient and necessary question that you are encountering, right? I think when you have those long chains that they're trying to get you to make the transitive property and connect all these different sufficient and necessary statements, I think, yeah, you're going to have to diagram that. I think that's a very rare person that can keep that clear in their head, particularly given the imperfection of the English language that the LSAT really relies on to trip you up. Now, that being said, I think, in terms of recognizing mistaking sufficient for necessary or vice versa, I don't know if you need to diagram that to realize that, right? I think, if you read a question and they assume that the existence of the sufficient, the existence of the necessary condition is going to lead us to the conclusion that the sufficient condition exists, we know that that's flawed logic, right? Do I need to diagram that? No. But again, I think to get to that point, I think it requires a lot of practice, right? So again, diagram everything. But again, when I say diagram everything, I mean diagram questions that have sufficient and necessary, right? Again, just because it's the most commonly tested form of reasoning on the LSAT doesn't mean it appears in every question or even the majority of the questions, right? So I think it's important to keep that into perspective. But again, not only is it important for logical reasoning, it's also a major thing for logic games, particularly group games, right? Benito Gatto's amazing screen name there. First question, not really relevant. Second question, how many law schools should I apply to? I think, again, matter of preference. I mean, don't forget that law schools generally charge you to apply, but you can get waivers, right? So another reason it's a good idea to kind of attend these LSAC law school forums. They just had one in DC. So you can go on LSAC's website and see if they have any other ones coming around in your area, because you can go meet the law school representatives, and generally they will try to get you to apply, and sometimes that will be a application waiver, fee waiver, right? But in terms of my personal story, I only applied to 7 schools. But obviously, other students, we've seen have applied to upwards of 30, right? I think, again, it's a matter of, personal preference. And again, I think it's also depending on how confident are you that you'll get into the schools that you're interested in attending. So here's do you have any recommendation for international students to improve on reading comp? Yes, obviously, this is not only for reading comp, I think, logical reasoning and just reading under time pressure for international students is challenging. English was my second language. I'm a first-generation immigrant, and my first language was Farsi. So this was something that I dealt with as well, although not to an extent of someone who has been a more recent transplant. I think, again, the most important thing is to just constantly expose yourself to that level of writing. And I think, another thing that's helpful is if you encounter words that you don't understand, spending time to look them up, with the hope being that doing that will start to build your vocabulary, which obviously will be helpful on the LSAT. So again, I think read to achieve would be the strategy there. Really make sure you practice reading comp consistently. practice reading in your spare time. Again, we recommend The Economist just because it's a well-written periodical, high level of vocabulary. And remember, LSAT actually gets the reading comp passages from actual places. They don't make them up, right? So, obviously journals and those things. So you can find other sources other than The Economist, but we find The Economist to be great because it's weekly and broad range of articles, including things that you have no interest in, just like the reading comp passages you're going to see on the LSAT. Should we skip reading comp line reference questions now? No, absolutely not. Remember, they're still going to exist. The only difference is instead of saying line 31, they're going to highlight the passage for you, but the concept of a line reference question still exists. And obviously, why did they get rid of line references? Because, if you can change the font size, everybody's lines are going to be different, right? It's not static anymore. So they actually can't use line references anymore. You'd have to point to that part in a different way. And that's obviously the idea of the highlighting. In terms of books, listen, we understand that students try to rely on books. The best books that have been out there have been LSAT's real prep test books, right? In terms of other books, we obviously have students using a bunch of things, some which are obviously better than others. I don't really have a sense because, we don't really spend time reviewing LSAT prep books that aren't related to us and what we're doing. So, again, I think, the important things to think about when you look at an LSAT prep book, does it use real questions first, right? A lot of the LSAT prep books out there do not use real questions, which I think that, to me, automatically rules it out as an option. Another thing just to keep in mind about books with the LSAT is the LSAT is a very visual exam. If you want to see that, if you come and watch our free lesson on sequencing games, you'll get a sense of what I'm talking about. The logic games is very visual. It's very nice to see somebody working through a logic games as opposed to reading about it. Same thing with sufficient necessary, right, on logical reasoning. And so, I think the visual component of the LSAT tends to, gravitate towards, using something that's more visual than a static book. And again, I understand that, most students who are, turning their attention to books, it's because of the inconvenience and cost of traditional LSAT prep, right? I totally understand that. So again, just some things to emphasize with LSATMax. We do have the LSAC fee waiver scholarship. So if you have been approved for LSAC's fee waiver, our premium package is completely free of charge. So definitely make sure to reach out to us and send us your fee waiver so we can get you access. Other things that we offer, our military scholarship is half price for current and former servicemen and women. And then we do offer no interest financing with our partner firm, right? So LSATMax Pro comes out to $62.50 a month. Premium comes out to $79.17 a month. And we hope those price points are budget friendly for every student. So definitely make sure to take advantage of that because I do think that there's a lot more valuable ways to prepare for the LSAT than using those books. What do you think of ASU's MLS Honors Program? Danielle, I apologize. I have never heard of it. If you didn't know we had a military discount and you already paid for the course, just reach out to us. We can always apply retroactively, guys. So yeah, I apologize that you weren't aware of that, but it's available. Even if you've already bought, just reach out to us. We'll take care of you. We're very proud of that scholarship and want to make sure every person who's eligible is taking advantage. All right, so let's see. I think we got through all of the questions in here. Let me see if there's any other ones that I've missed. All right, so we talked about best ways to absolutely, of course, yes. So again, guys, just reach out to us if you enrolled in our course without the military scholarship, so we can take care of that for you. So we talked about the best way to improve on logic games. We talked about reading comp. We talked a little bit about logical reasoning. But again, I think logical reasoning is two steps. One is making sure we understand the strategies and techniques, right? So how do I approach strengthen questions, strengthen with necessary premise, strengthen with sufficient premise, weaken questions, cause and effect arguments, parallel reasoning, flawed parallel reasoning, errors in reasoning, methods of reasoning, right? We definitely want to be comfortable with all of the different question types and the corresponding strategies. And then obviously once you've got that in place, I think you definitely want to focus on what we talked about with, not reading the stimulus too fast because, again, it's counterproductive. And again, something that we got a question about again this week about, should I read the question stem first? And this is when I talk about gimmicks that some of our, competitors like to offer to students. And that's what that is. That's a gimmick, reading the question stem first. And the reason I say that is because it misses the entire point of logical reasoning. The point of logical reasoning, again, is testing your ability to encounter flawed arguments and realize that they're flawed. And so everything that's happening in logical reasoning is based on your understanding of the stimulus. And so that's where you should start, and that's where you should spend the majority of your time, right? And by doing that, sure, it'll take you a little bit longer to get to the question stem and answer choices, but you'll be able to quickly eliminate irrelevant answer choices. And when you get it down to those two, everybody knows what it's like to get it down to those two, always pick the wrong one. If you spend more time on the stimulus, you'll start to make that distinction and pick the right one, right? I remember that experience myself, arguing with people about why the answer I chose had to be right and how the LSAT was wrong. No, right? I just didn't understand the exam in the way that I needed to at that point. Another question that we got was what to do while waiting for your score. So a lot of students obviously out there took the July LSAT waiting for their score to come in, not sure how to spend their time. Again, I think it comes back to how confident you are in the fact that you achieved your target score. If you're not confident, you should be spending this time to continue to prepare. You should not be waiting for your score to come, right? If you're confident, right, maybe do less work, right? But obviously I think, if you're not confident, time is an incredible ally when it comes to LSAT prep, so you should be taking advantage of this time as you await your July score. Remember, worst case scenario, your July score shows up, you're thrilled, you're done preparing on, I think they're coming out August 28th, right? So definitely something to consider. Now, okay, so Daniel, thank you for sending that information. They're accepting students with low LSAT scores under the MLS program if they get 3.3 GPA in the first semester. They're enrolled in the JD program. So again, listen, ASU is a good law school, right? And so if that's a school that you're interested in attending, why not? Right? I don't think I would be adverse to that. And I think, yeah, you're right. I think other schools are starting to roll that out. Are the scores instant on the digital LSAT? Again, no, they're not. And if anybody's wondering why, don't forget that LSAT sometimes removes questions from scoring. And I think that's why, even in the digital LSAT world, they're still going to wait to make sure that none of the questions that appeared on that exam didn't show the kind of results they were expecting, right? Questions that might not have been the best question, they'll remove it. And so I think that's why even in the digital world you're seeing a slight delay when it comes to the scores being released. But obviously it will be faster than it was in the Scantron world, which is great from our perspective of getting our applications in as quickly as possible. Another question that I did see come in a couple of times that I did want to address. A lot of people asking about whether we offer admissions consulting, personal statement consulting, and the answer is yes. So if that is something that you're interested in, please reach out to us. Again, you can text us at 310-818-7743. If you have the app, just tap the support icon from the left menu, open a chat with us, and obviously you can always email us, support@testmaxprep.com. but we do offer those services. And again, happy to share my personal experience with you guys free of charge. And again, we will do an Instagram live Q&A about law school admissions. And I'm actually hoping to get a guest to join me who might know a lot more about it than I do. So stay tuned. We're working on some exciting things for you guys. What score should you aim for if you didn't do well in undergrad unless 3.0? So again, remember, I mean, something I talked about last week, I think. The beauty of the LSAT is it's the number one factor in law school admissions. So if your GPA is low, it's irrelevant. As long as you score what you need to score on the LSAT, the law school is going to give you serious consideration. And again, the reason for that is it is impossible for law schools to compare students from different undergraduate institutions with different majors, right? I think it's really important to realize that. And obviously the LSAT is a standardized exam that every pre-law student has to take, and so it's a standard measure that they can use to compare. So it's apples to apples as opposed to apples to oranges. So good news if you didn't take undergrad as seriously as you should have. Obviously not good news if you have a 4.0. Although 4.0 won't hurt just as long as you get your LSAT where it needs to be as well. So we're winding down here. Oh, and do you need an addendum? I mean, listen, if you want to write an addendum to explain your GPA, sure. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But again, just remember, it's not that important. What matters is your LSAT score. I don't know anything about you, Grace, and I can tell you that if you break 170, you will go to a top 10 law school. Which law school in the top 10? Can't say, right? But you'll definitely be accepted to a top 10 law school if you break 170. So yeah, again, opposite of the question. Yeah, so unfortunately, the bad news is a high GPA will not overcome a low LSAT score. So yes, I would recommend waiting to apply. Again, so there's two options, right? We can always apply and see what happens, right? If you don't get accepted to schools that you were hoping for, you can always wait a year and apply next year after retaking the LSAT. Remember, guys, I took 3 years off between undergrad and law school, and don't be in a rush to grow up, because after law school it's real life, and I think enjoying your youth is a good piece of advice. So some other things that I kind of want to stress here as we wind down here, we're getting close to the 2-minute countdown, is really just, again, the importance of viewing LSAT prep as an active learning process. Because again, remember, you are changing the way your mind works. And the only way to do that is by constantly exposing yourself to this new type of thinking, right? And so, when I used to teach in class, I used to tell my students the same thing. Coming and hanging out with me twice a week, 4 hours a day, is not going to be enough to get you to your target score, right? In terms that you should understand, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient, right? You need to put in the time. An analogy that I think is really apt for this generation, although maybe only apt from the first part of it, because I don't know if you'll remember the second part, but there is no Netflix when it comes to LSAT prep. There's no instant stream, no LSAT and chill, right? If you want to watch a movie, I want you to think about LSAT prep as that old Blockbuster video store where you had to get up off your couch, drive down to the nearest Blockbuster, rummage through endless aisles of videos, find the video that you want to watch, rent it, drive home, watch it, rewind it, drive back to Blockbuster and return it, right? That's LSAT prep, right? So regardless of whether you're taking an in-class course, online course, self-studying, right? Remember the importance of putting in the time to change your life, basically the path of your life, right? I mean, the ability of this exam. Yes, I know most of you don't realize what Blockbuster Video is, but if you Google it, you'll remember that there was these stores that actually used to rent videos way back when, right? I know, yes, I appreciate you reminding us that we are much older than the majority of the people who preparing for the LSAT. So again, guys, I really appreciate you guys coming out to join me and getting all your questions in. I hope I was able to get to all of them. Again, if we missed anything, please don't hesitate to shoot us a text. And I will see you guys next week. Same place, same time. Until then.